Now, with me also I have in studio is Dr. Diane Parker, Deputy General Director, General of the Department of Higher Education and Training. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. Now, this seems to have gone into a crisis mode at this point. It's not just a thing of one province, it's a thing of 9 provinces. There was supposed to be a meeting, now there's not a meeting. And, students say they knew about this general meeting. They didn't know, about the postponement of the general meeting. VIT says they've obviously informed. It seems to be a lot of confusion at this point in time. What is what are the policies when it comes to higher education on these matters?
Look, I mean, what's happening at WITS is very unfortunate, and I think it is incredibly unfortunate that there's this idea that it must be no fees or no higher education. That will have very long-term effects on our system, very detrimental effects. And I think that it shows that there is some underlying thing as well about trying to bring down the governance of higher education in the country as a whole. I think that we can't ignore that. The genuine issue around affordability of higher education and ensuring that we support students who have made it there through financial means is the genuine issue that we have to focus on as we go forward. From the point of the Constitution, this is sort of the policy in higher education finds its basis in the Constitution. And the Constitution is very clear on education. It itself comes from the Freedom Charter, as you know. And we've heard a lot of students saying, and people generally saying, government promised free education for all. And I think it's quite enlightening to go and read the actual statements themselves, because that enables us to really understand what's underlying this and the difference between higher education and what is called education in that promise.
Yes.
And I think one needs to actually read the statements to get that. I brought them with me because I thought it was very important that we get this out there. What does the Freedom Charter actually say? The Freedom Charter says education shall be free, compulsory and universal for all children. I think that's an absolute statement. It's something that's been taken through our Constitution, and it's something that the government is currently implementing in basic education. It then goes on, the very next sentence, to say higher education and technical training shall be open to all by means of allowances, scholarships awarded on the basis of merit. And what that says is higher education and technical education is not seen as the education.
The basic education.
The basic education. It's not seen as the fundamental right. It is something you move into after having received that basic right. And it can become available to those who make it, who merit it, through various means of financial aid. That's what it's saying. And when we came to the Constitution of South Africa, that was actually written into the Constitution itself.
I'm going to ask you to please hold that idea for now. We have a ANN7 reporter who is on the ground, Natasha Perry. Thank you so much for also joining us this afternoon. It is quite hectic, as I understand, in terms of the students trying to also stand their ground and basically have their voices heard. Now, we are looking at the fact of the Constitution, what it says about free education, basic education and free higher education. What are the students saying in terms of infringing on the fundamental rights of other students to learn if they want to?
Well, very good afternoon to you and to the viewers once again. And just before I actually answer your question, I just want to paint a picture of how things have actually drastically changed here. Earlier on, students were in a very disappointing and somber mood, but the mood has changed inside the tent where the General Assembly is actually carrying on without the WITS University management. Students were seen singing struggle songs and quite in a jubilant mood. I'm actually joined by an academic, Usinabo, and he'll just actually take us through what actually is going inside the tent, and if he thinks that free education is actually achievable. We spoke to a student earlier on saying that the students at Wits University have somewhat drafted a funding model that will actually help them, or the government and the state, to actually achieve the dream of free education. It's about 14 pages long. Unfortunately, nobody can take us through that right now as they're busy inside the tent. But I'll just come to my guest, Usinab, and just take us through from an academic's point of view. Is free education achievable in our lifetimes? Usinab, thank you so much for joining us on ANN7. I mean, we've had a debate. I mean, the guests in studio taking us through the framework of free education. Is it possible within our lifetime?
Indeed it is. But before I delve into it, I think students have been very clear, and it would seem no one wants to listen. And we are in this crisis because the powers that be refuse to listen. And in order to sort out this crisis, we ought to be listening to students. As the students who have spoken, Section 29(1)(b) of the Constitution speaks into higher education, and no one seems to be listening. And why is that? I mean, from a governmental perspective, looking at the cabinet, how many ministers do we have there? How many ministries that are overlapping in what they're doing? So yes, it is possible that we can achieve free and quality decolonized higher education. And all we want is a platform for people to listen. Don't address us through the media. Come down and speak to your constituency. It is rather repugnant and rather belligerent of the powers that be. I mean, you deem yourself as a superpower, but you don't want to listen. And yet you want to sort out the crisis. It just cannot be.
Unfortunately, due to a lack of time, you have to cross back to the studio. But you've heard our guest remaining resolute and, just standing his ground, saying that if only the superpowers would just actually listen to the students, free, decolonialized education is really an achievable dream. Back to you in studio.
Thank you very much, Natasha Perry, there on the ground at Wits, hearing from the students. Back to you, Doctor. Very interesting thing that he said. Just in closing, he says nobody's listening. What is the Department of Higher Education doing at this point? Because the students feel like no one is listening.
I think he said two things. He suggested that the Constitution in Section 29(b) promised free higher education. I want to read out what it says.
Okay.
First, because then I can explain to you what we've been doing, how we've been doing it, and also how we have been working with students and with various stakeholder groups. It says, first, everyone has a right to basic education, including adult basic education, and B, to further education, which the state, through reasonable measures, must make progressively available and accessible. How has that been interpreted, and what does that mean? So it's clear, basic education is a fundamental right. Higher education is something that needs to be made accessible and available.
Well, thank you so much.
Available means creating spaces for students to learn, and that we've been working at very hard. We've doubled the number of spaces in higher education institutions, and we've tripled the number of spaces in TVET colleges. Accessible means making it accessible to all, ensuring it's affordable, and then making sure that those who are financially needy are supported. Through NSFAS, we have provided over the last 20 years more than almost 60 billion and supported 2.5 million students who were poor into higher education and TVET colleges. And currently we support 480,000 students across universities and colleges with what is essentially free higher education. That is how we've been progressively rolling this out. And when he says